Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our guests, to everybody in the room, and also welcome to the people online. We're here to talk about the bioeconomy, green finance, and innovation nexus, and the role of policy. We will hear a lot about these terms, and I'm sure many of you have some idea of what they might mean. We often hear about bioeconomy as related to ecological economics or even degrowth. We, of course, hear about green finance. We've heard a lot about it at COP, about mobilizing private investment. And we, especially at IIPP, we hear a lot about innovation. What is innovation? Is it really neutral or is it political? Of course, the picture is much more complicated than this, and we'll hear a bit about various ways to look at the bioeconomy, green finance, and innovation nexus. However, before we do that, I'll have to do some presentations. But first of all, I'm presenting the Institute. We're here at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at University College London. And our institute brings together cutting-edge academic theory with teaching and policy practice to rethink the role of the state in tackling some of the biggest challenges facing society. Of course, today we're talking about innovation-led, sustainable, inclusive development. And I'm Giovanni Tagliani. I'm a PhD candidate here for another few months. Hopefully I will finish soon. I actually have already another PhD. This is my second PhD, and my previous PhD was about the bioeconomy, circular innovation and development. And we have here three guests. And here I have to read my notes because they have a very substantial CV. So I don't remember all by memory. Dr. Francis Xavier Johnson holds a PhD in energy and climate systems. He's a senior research fellow at Stockholm Environment Institute with over 30 years of experience in interdisciplinary policy analysis, capacity building and research, with a particular focus on the sustainable use of land and biomass, the bioeconomy, renewable energy, and climate stabilization and resilience. He served as a principal investigator for SEI's, the Stockholm Environment Institute Global Bioeconomy Initiative, for over 8 years, and he served on various expert groups for UN agencies and other international organizations. Francis was the lead author for the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land, and a member of the writing team of the IPCC AR6 Synthesis Report. Welcome to IIPP, Francis. We then have Dr. Rocio Diaz-Chavez, which holds a PhD in Sustainable Development Indicators. She is a senior research fellow at the Center for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. She has also served for 5 years as deputy director and energy and climate change program leader at the SEI Africa Center, and she coordinated the bioenergy strategy for East Africa. Her research focuses on sustainability assessment in the realm of bioeconomy, bioenergy, land use, socioeconomic governance, and climate change. Rocio has consulted for UNDP, the World Bank, and developed indicators for the FAO's Global Bioenergy Partnership. She serves on the advisory board of the World Bioeconomy Forum, and she is a member of the UN International Resource Panel. Rocio as well also contributed to the writing of the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land and the IPCC AR6 Synthesis Report. Welcome to IIPP, Rocio. And then we have our own Damon Atkin, who's our discussant for the event. Damon is a research fellow at IIPP on macrofinancial policy for the green transition, and is also wrapping up his PhD in economics from SOAS. His research focuses on ecological, macro, and development economics, especially green macroeconomic and industrial policy. And his previous work includes research for the Overseas Development Institute and the UN and the UN on small island developing states capital costs, and a chapter on for the Oxford Handbook focusing a chapter focusing on green finance. Welcome, Damon. So as you've heard, they have a lot of experience related to these topics, apart from all of this experience, I just wanted to add a very recent publication, which was last month, right before COP, which was the UNEP, the UN Environmental Program Climate Technology Progress Report, of which both were contributing authors. Rocio led the chapter on financing and investing in bio-based technologies, and Francis the chapter on policies, institutions, governance, and international cooperation. So we will now start with the presentations, first by Francis, who will give more of a high-level view of these topics, and then with Rocio, also with some applied examples. And I leave the floor to you, Francis.
Yeah, thanks, Giovanni. I found a good solution for the microphone here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this broad context, and I'll explain the climate resilient development for those not so familiar with the term. But I have to say a few words about my organization, which is the Stockholm Environment Institute. And the name has nothing to do with the city of Stockholm. The name comes from the 1972 Stockholm Conference. It was the first UN conference on the human environment, and it came to be known as the Stockholm Conference. So that's an interesting historical fact. And we have put some emphasis on circularity and bioeconomy in the strategy. And the SEI has centers different around the world: Asia, Africa, Latin America, as well as Europe, and the headquarters in Stockholm and the US. So I'd like to use this quote start with this quote because many years ago I came from energy climate side, and I'm not a biologist, but when I was working on energy and climate issues, and particularly bioenergy, you started to see when you try to unravel a system that suddenly it connects to this and that and all the different sectors. So instead of just dealing with energy sector, you find you're dealing with agriculture sector, forestry sector, transport sector, and everything gets all mixed up, and then you're really not sure. And so it relates to any time you work with the land sectors, or let's say related to biomass. Now, I should note that I won't say very much about marine biomass, and that's why the title of the talk was terrestrial. Why use a one-syllable word when you can use a four-syllable word, right? Of course, they are both important, but they're different, so there just isn't quite time to deal with both. So I want to say about climate resilient development, this complex figure, which people spend so much time on, but the message is actually fairly simple, is that there are these sort of stark choices that you can think about with climate resilient development. You have the red paths or the orange paths, these entrenched systems with fossil fuels and increasing risk, ecosystem degradation, or try to move to the green path with renewables and transitions across all the different sectors. And here you see the different conditions, enabling and constraining this. So it's a fairly broad framework, just to remind that you cannot isolate each measure, but recognize that there is a sort of fortuitous pathways that you can follow, or you can follow these resource-intensive pathways, which we have been doing for most of the industrialized history. And a different take on that helps to spin this to a bioeconomy angle, and that's by thinking of the climate system, the ecosystems, and the human system and the interactions among them. And so this perspective helps as thinking about bioeconomy and how it can contribute to climate and development goals. And so I'll go into some more particular ideas about the bioeconomy. And we often then talk about the transitions, and they're so interconnected, and that's related to this idea of bioeconomy, because instead of just dealing with one sector, you're dealing with many sectors, but always at the outside of it all, and sort of facilitating it all, you need finance, right? Which is not my specialty. I know some of you are very interested in this and work on this, so I won't say too much about finance. Rocio will say a little bit more. But just recognizing these systems and how they are interrelated is part of the work we do in bioeconomy. So this, a lot of people get hung up on the definition of bioeconomy. You know, what does that mean? And rather than getting too hung up on it, the International Advisory Board for the Global Bioeconomy Summit came up with this extremely broad definition, but it's fairly useful anyway. Production, utilization, conservation of biological resources. and you see the word innovation in there, and you see science, technology, and it crosses all sectors. So this is one of the key things, that we're not just working within a sector. This is sort of fundamental. So thinking about these transitions, I like this framing, which was developed quite some years ago now. I think it was about 10 years ago. Thinking about the natural economy, the fossil economy, and the bioeconomy. So the bioeconomy is what we want to work towards. And there were some pretty famous economists back in the 60s and 70s who first visualized this and understood that actually this is the only truly sustainable economy is a bioeconomy, basically. But how do you get there? And just to point out some characteristics here is to remind that it is, let's say, more land intensive. It has to be more land intensive than the fossil economy. And it means that you have to use land and biomass really productively. Whereas the natural economy that you see in subsistence agriculture or use of, for example, use of wood fuels for cooking, this is also very land intensive, but very unproductive and not really suitable for a prosperous society. So often we ask this question, then how do we make this jump, in some cases, from natural economy to bioeconomy? Because in least developed countries, you know, can they jump over the fossil economy? And there are some transitions, you know, and there are some cases of this. It's of course not easy to do, and we might talk about that later. And then I just like to remind on the energy side that this transition actually happened pretty quickly in energy use, that it's a little more than 200 years ago, pretty much all of energy was biomass. And that was what you might call a natural economy in most of the world, and still is in quite large part of Africa. And so we still have this significant amount of biomass use, but a great deal of it is still used for traditional uses, which is what I'm referring to as the natural economy. So it's also important to phase that out. So this is just one view of the transition. And then I'd like to point out how the physical space has been transformed over time, and giving this some historical perspective. In fact, I think a lot of the time I'm using a lot of this historical context because in the policy space, people tend to focus on what happened last year and, you know, what's going to happen next year. But when you deal with physical systems, you cannot be effective that way. You must think long term. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So understanding history is actually also useful. And so this transformation in 1850, it was really only Europe and some parts of China and a few other areas that had a fairly intensive use. And then over this period of over 150 years, the land cover was significantly transformed. And the other reason I show this graph is the yellow areas of pasture land are actually the areas where there could be there is a significant potential for bioenergy and bioeconomy in these areas. And so land is not really the scarce resource. It's more likely water in most places, actually. But this transformation occurred actually over a relatively short period of time, if you put it in perspective. So what does all this land use change mean for climate? In Europe and North America, land is now a net sink. Not a very big one. I don't know if you can see the small gray bars for Europe and North America. So there is a net sink for greenhouse gases in Europe and North America, but the net emissions from land use in Latin America, Asia, and Africa are really significant. And so you cannot address climate change in the global south without significant changes in how land and biomass are used. So this is sort of one of the fundamental issues to lay out here, that because there's this tendency to think, oh, if we can just replace fossil fuels, that's enough. This is not nearly enough because the transformation in land use in some ways is even more fundamental. So I'd like to continue with some of these historical examples and thinking about innovation and transport, and compare fossil fuels and renewable fuels. This is an advertisement. I happen to live in Sweden. This is an advertisement from 1936. We don't have any Swedish speakers here, do we? No. Oh, that's good. Then you can't see the little secret that's hidden in there. Basically, what is the efficiency of this car? You know, you would think 1936 can't be very efficient, right? Well, I don't know how familiar you are with the numbers, but it was 6 liters per 100 kilometers, this car made in 1936. And so where are we, you know, many years later? This is a model from 2019, and the average efficiency that year was 6 liters per 100 kilometers. You know, when I discovered this, I guess a few years ago, I was like, that's unbelievable. So in 85 years, we have made no progress, basically. And what is the reason? Of course, it's because everything other than fuel efficiency was prioritized, right? So I would call that innovation for private gain, basically, most of it. I mean, not all of it. Some of it is, of course, helpful to the consumer. So then I was thinking to compare that to flex fuel transport, you know, adding in renewable fuels. And one of the first cars, the Model T, ran on multiple fuels, including ethanol. You know, and this is more than 100 years ago, right? So this car, Model T, 12 to 18 liters per 100 kilometers, which is obviously a lot worse than you know, the others. So there was a rapid improvement in the internal combustion engine. And then you have this Brazilian flexi fuel car today, which is actually 7.5, which is not bad because internal combustion engine is not optimized for biofuel. It's optimized for petrol-driven fuel or gasoline. So you can't get as well. So that's a better transition. So it's just, I thought it was an interesting example to compare these two. And this transition, you know, particularly what the Brazilians have accomplished, and you have studied this in even more detail than me, is that, you know, it was innovation with public purpose, which, you know, relates to the name of your institute. So I thought, well, that's a good example to talk about today, because that's the difference. And what is, you know, why are you doing the innovation? Is it for private gain or public purpose? So I'd like to point out also some more facts here about how important it is how we use biomass, because the demand is actually quite skewed. So people, quite some years ago, people were all concerned, oh, we're going to use too much land for bioenergy or biofuels. And the amount for biofuels, in the last time it was well calculated, it was a few years ago. So the amount for biofuels was around 2%. For animal feed, 56%. So this is an astonishingly unproductive use of land and biomass, because it's animal feed, which is then, of course, I mean, people, the animal, the greenhouse gas intensity of this process is really amazing, you know, compared to a vegetarian diet or at least a modified diet. So we're using all this land and biomass and, you know, basically wasting most of it. So one of the ideas of the bioeconomy is that there should be a more balanced use of how we use land and biomass. It should be more valuable and productive. And it affects, again, coming back to this transformation of the landscape. Instead of, you know, these nasty looking factories, you move the factory into the fields, right? And that's the bioscience side of it. So then just to talk, coming back to innovation, since that's your focus here at the Institute, and thinking about this idea of how do you visualize this for different bio-based technologies. I'd like to use this graph just to remind that you cannot necessarily jump or leapfrog to high-tech solutions. This is not going to work in a lot of countries. But you don't want to regress to low-tech solutions either. First-generation biofuels, some of them are quite inefficient, and certain annual crops, monocultures, even if they're efficient in terms of yield, they cause a lot of negative environmental impacts. So you want to move into this mid-tech area. I mean, for wealthier countries, of course, they can focus on high-tech. But in this discussion, we're sort of thinking about more emerging economies. And to take one example, agroforestry, this is very cross-cutting. You know, you can't measure productivity in the same way because you're getting more productivity out of agriculture by integrating it with trees in the landscape. So what are these value-added products that we like to talk about in bioeconomy? Well, there's all different ones, and some of them, are on the energy side. The biofuels can also be bioplastics, biomaterials, different types of biomaterials, and biocosmetics. And these are just some of the crops that are fairly popular. Now, some of them have their own significant impacts. I mean, sugarcane is a monocrop, and it has some. There are definitely issues associated with this. At the same time, it is very efficient. So you can take an approach where some land is used very efficiently, and maybe it is a monocrop in order to preserve other areas. That's sort of the spare and share, land sharing or land sparing argument. So these are just some examples. I think Rocio is going to go into some more detail on these. I'd like to give an example also on the energy side, which is related to climate resilience and carbon removal. Biochar is an interesting case because biochar improves the carbon sequestration in soils, but it also helps actually some of the properties that are needed for higher productivity for certain types of crops. And it has all these integration across sectors, agriculture, forestry. And so this is an interesting example where you get this climate resilient development rather than just mitigating or removing in a purely technical way. And just an example from Thailand where they have a very well-developed cassava bioeconomy with a lot of exports, but as well as a lot of domestic use, high-value products, quite successful, I would say. And Giovanni, in his first PhD, had some experience with this in his field work in Thailand. So the Thai case is very interesting. So I'd like to then just move briefly, and I think I'm doing badly on time, so I have to speed up 2 minutes. I can almost make it, maybe 3. Framing and context, just to say that this bioeconomy, there's a lot of strategies. So if you're working on policy, you'll see all these strategies coming out for different countries and regions. But they also have to be reconciled with SDGs and with mitigation goals, and then moving to the implementation side, because you often see a lot of beautiful policies on paper, but how are they implemented is usually the issue. So just mentioning this framing, which we used in this UNEP report, and then to say that it really matters a lot, the stakeholders and the visions they have of bioeconomy. And you will see that there's an interesting paper came out some years ago showing that people tend to break down on one of these visions: biotechnology, bioresources, bioecology. It's a pretty useful division because it has a big effect on the pathways you will choose for development. And the governance of bioeconomy is also greatly connected to this, because if it's based on technology, has very particular governance requirements. If there's a big push on getting more resource value, that's a different style. Okay, so I'm winding up now, and then just to say that this is really what you might say is the core issue of a bioeconomy, that you bring together innovation, you bring together this cross-sectoral or cross-cutting idea, and then adding value. And so the governance challenge for this is quite significant. And then I'd like to mention some global institutions, which, if those of you are interested in working on bioeconomy, you'll find these organizations sort of steering this debate at global level, and a lot are getting involved now. Some are in the lead, like the FAO, but also on UNCTAD when it comes to trade. The G20 has had a big initiative, and there is also quite a difference in whether you're focused on standards, which is more like informational governance, or making a commitment through the UN conventions or through UNEP and its programs. Okay, so now I'm just highlighting then some key issues that this idea of a systemic approach that and really coherence across different policies. Participation is even more important because unlike the tech sectors, you can't just crank out a new technology and scale it up. There has to be participation from quite a wide group. You need safeguards, legal framework. The standards and monitoring are needed as in any area, but particularly in these because of their environmental impacts. And then finally, just the idea of how to get to deployment and how to scale up, which is quite different compared to renewables and let's say compared to what we've seen in energy, because it's very wide range of applications. Okay, that's it. And I'll just give a little information. Next year will be this Global Bioeconomy Summit in Ireland. And that's an opportunity for the whole community to discuss. Okay, I went over a few minutes, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Francis. I think we should proceed already with Rocio's presentation. If you do have questions for Francis, make a note, and after Rocio's presentation and Damon's questions, we'll open up the floor to the audience here in the room and also online. Rocio, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I don't have a pocket on my cardigan to hold the microphone, so I will just do it like this. So maybe before just starting, I would like to make a very quick poll. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you have a background in environmental or science, let's say life science? Okay. How many of, yeah, okay. 1, 2. How many of you have a background on social science? Okay, majority. Economics? Okay, that's good. Let's say we can leave it at that point. So let me just mention that maybe Francis and I have known each other for nearly 20 years or so. So some things do not overlap, let's say just complement each other. So with my presentation. So as per the introduction from Giovanni, well, you know that I don't really need to introduce very much about Imperial except showing off that we are the second university in Europe, second university in the world, so it's good to be there. We have, of course, more than 25 now, 1,000 students, more than 8,000 staff, and we have an international community, I think, very similar to UCL, more than 125 countries from around the world. So I have been also for many years at Imperial, so this is just to show you the range of projects that I have worked and the possibilities of have all the places around the world that I had the possibility of work. So that has given me at least this idea of what is happening in other parts of the world and how actually the bioeconomy has developed. So for many people now, Francis gave this introduction about the definition. For many people do not know, but bioeconomy, despite that has been there for a long time, the term was actually coined around 2007 by somebody from the European Commission, and people call him the father of bioeconomy, Chris Patterman. So he actually coined the word saying, well, we need to do something about how we manage our natural resources and how we deal with them also in terms of climate change, because we want to decarbonize. That was really the idea of how it moved. So along of all these years that I have been working with this topic, even if it was not called bioeconomy, I have used this range of methods methods and tools. So some of them are really traditional environmental management tools that like environmental and social impact assessment, strategic assessment, sustainability integrated assessment, so all of them. And with a framework that not only covered the 3 traditional pillars of sustainability, but also the 4th one that is on policy regulations and governance. And all of them, of course, according to how the development goals or the monitoring goals, the Millennium Goals were changing. And one more that it's on landscape governance. And I like the one on landscape governance because you can integrate a lot of stakeholders within this methodology. And that is something that we need to do for bioeconomy. So, of course, a lot of the vision of bioeconomy from the global north is related to climate change and emissions. His idea was really to reduce these emissions, like trying to change some of these fossil fuel products with these bioproducts. And unfortunately, that some countries are really not big emitters. Nevertheless, because of all the agreements, they have to do it. And some of these emissions have actually started to reduce a little bit in some areas. But even in the global south, we have to think that despite that there is not really a lot of emissions from the industrial sector, there is from deforestation or from the agricultural sector. So we have to also think about that and how we can integrate these issues. So same idea with this was actually very interesting because this diagram was developed by the Finnish bioeconomy strategy. And actually, I think it was one of the first ones as individual countries in Europe. So I think that Francis has already explained it, so I will not go much into that, except that I don't think that we really need to be thinking about the countries in the global south, that they have to make a leap in the from the fossil economy to bioeconomy, because actually many of them are not really fully into the fossil economy. They are still dealing with other aspects that are not fully like in other countries. And this division, actually last year we launched this report with Nature Finance and the World Bioeconomy Forum. And during the discussions, I mentioned about this difference between a very nature-intensive bioeconomy, an advanced bioeconomy where you have a little bit more of these advanced technologies, and a high-tech bioeconomy. And I want you to remember this because the high-tech bioeconomy involves a lot of patents. And one of the things that we found out during this writing this report is around 80% of the patents that are related to the bioeconomy are split between United States and China. That is a lot. So you have to think that because a lot of these advanced bioeconomy and high-tech issues are related to this innovation path. But if there are no patents, there is no technology that you can apply, and there is no money for that. And one more thing about this, of when the nature-intensive bioeconomy, in a meeting we had in Washington, the head of WWF said something that I think it is really important to keep in mind. I mean, with bioeconomy, we also don't want it to be that we are just making nature a way of business, let's say. We have to think also about the rights that nature has on its own. And actually, there is a huge new development movement going on in the United States that is called something like nature rights. And it is something that is going to come even more into the future when we relate to this. So there are different approaches that we can have. And I think that regional and local views are very important, especially for the governance. You can have for the monitoring, for example, this geographical scale, these landscape governments, and then you will have to select indicators for that. While you can also have another way to monitor through supply chains or the end product, and then you will have also to select some of these relevant indicators. But one thing that it is important that very few consider is that the difference between temperate regions and tropical regions for the bioeconomy are really, really important because then you have to work with whatever you have, whatever are your needs, and whatever you can produce. So we cannot compare even if we say the global south, well, yes, but Brazil is very different to Colombia. And even when we talk about Africa, it's a continent. It has many countries, so we cannot be thinking about that. But anyway, I don't know how many of you are really related to this cascading principle, but this is something that has been governing a lot of the bioeconomy in Europe, because the idea here is that you have these three levels that are really where you have the high value molecules. And that is the one within bioeconomy that would prefer to focus on rather than burning the biomass, as it is the first scale you have here. And of course, we want to relate it to the SDGs and to the circular economy. So we want to think about adding value to these supply chains and considering not just the raw material, but also the bioresidues, the residues you get. So we did along the supply chain, consider all the stakeholders, consider gender differences, and also what the consumers are asking for. So many socioeconomic issues also related to work, gender training, and equality. So let me give you this example because for example, some of the examples that Francis gave were focusing on the crop. But you can also work with the residues, with the what some consider waste. We prefer not to call them waste. We prefer to call them residues. So this was one of the first 3 bioeconomy projects that the European Union funded. And I wasn't actually in the 3 of them, but this was the main one for us. So this project was called BioCore, and in this one we were using residues. So it was agricultural residues, forestry residues, separating them to obtain lignin and cellulose, and from there having all this range of product that you can have. So you can see here we were talking about second generation fuels. Now we call them advanced fuels because we have really moved beyond that. You can produce thermoplastics, resins, food additives, detergents, wood panels with different uses in different sectors. Then we have this other project that came in the second group of projects funded. This project was called Cosmos, and you can see here how we were calling this supply chain stakeholders diagram, where we were already introducing all the stakeholders that were there, how they received this kind of projects, what they think. And I think one of the important aspects of this project that we were working with 2 crops here, camelina and crumble, that were not really developed in Europe, but they had a great potential, and it was this. For food safety regulation, talking about GMOs. This is a no-go area for the UK and in general for Europe, but there are technologies that now they are called NGT, so these are new genetic technologies, and one of them is this CRISP. So CRISP is not a genetic modified organism. It is just a way to accelerate the evolution, let's say, of one crop. So with this one, we were trying to do this with camelina and cranberry just to see if it was possible to speed up the production side so that you obtain better yields in that time. But it is nothing related to GMO. Unfortunately, not everybody of the policymakers understand this, so it was a no-go area. But now we are, for those of you who do not know, last Friday, the new bioeconomy strategy for Europe was launched. And this year, the Biotechnology Act #1 was also launched. The second one is going to be launched next year. And literally, they told us they don't know what is going to be included there. But they want to think whatever they miss in the bioeconomy strategy and Act 1 biotechnology will be included in Act Biotechnology #2. So it is a big change. And just to mention here, we also work on what were the funding opportunities. So just to mention this one, BBI, for example, doesn't exist anymore. But new funding has emerged also in Europe for particularly the private sector. So there are other opportunities in bioeconomy. As it was mentioned, I coordinated the East African Regional Bioeconomy Strategy. So food security, health and well-being, development of industry with biomaterials and sustainable energy were the topics that 9 countries decided to include in the revision of bioeconomy within a strategy. And if you can see, they're not so different of what we have. One issue is that we managed to, if you want to say, convince them that safaris were not part of the bioeconomy because they wanted to include them. And this is a service sector. So there is not really transformation. There is not a product that you can really see it as tangible. There are services. So they went with this idea. We were happy about that. But now, for example, Costa Rica, Colombia, and even Brazil have included in their bioeconomy strategies also ecotourism. Other uses, for example, of biofuels in this region, it's not just for liquid biofuels for transport, but also for cooking. So traditional communities, instead of using fuel wood, can use ethanol for cooking stoves, for producing biogas, for cogeneration, for example, in the sugarcane mills and even in the breweries, same as here, or even improves charcoal supply chains and better integrated land use management systems. So quickly, I want to give you this example in Kenya. This project, I did it in 2020, but I went back this year and I was glad to see that they have made very good progress. Croton megalocarpus, it's an indigenous tree that runs from East Africa all the way to Southern Africa. And the interesting idea here is that they collect the seeds. The seeds are transported to the factory where they dry the husk, press, and extract oil that can be used for as biofuel, for example, for machinery. It can be used as fertilizer, and it can be used also with pyrolysis as biopesticide, and you can feed animals with this. So the interesting part is that this supply chain is based on a business model where you have the farmers who collect. They cannot go to the forest. These are the trees that they have at home. They collect the fruits. They sell them to an agent who pays them directly. Then the agent sends them to the factory. The factory pays the agent. So it's a kind of a pyramid, but a good pyramid, not the other pyramids that we know. So this is actually a very good one. What is also very interesting is that it's I would say it's a medium-sized company. It's from a Kenyan individual who had this very good idea, and he managed to get some funds from an American investor. So that is the next part I will discuss with you. They have improved, so they have more now than 6,000 farmers working. It's an extra income for them, and they have 140 agents, more or less 50 and 50 men and women. So it is really, really interesting. So in all these projects, I have been using these different type of bioeconomy indicators. They are not the same as those used for by FAO or by other organizations. These have been developed also within these projects. But I just wanted to quickly go through some of them. So just to show you that, for example, yes, I have included the business model, how they are working, or human development index, rather than just creating jobs. And with this, we have created other different sets of indicators that we adapt according to the different case studies that we have. But for example, in this case, we reviewed for over 30 years the Human Development Index in all the municipalities in Sao Paulo in Brazil, because this is the state where they grow more sugar cane. So we compared the municipalities with and without sugar cane. And over 30 years, we saw how the municipalities with sugar cane increased considerably their Human Development Index. So that is a very interesting indicator that not everybody uses. So also, I'm getting closer. Also from this report that was mentioned before that we produced for UNEP, why are we interested on this? Because we think that bioeconomy can really bring substantial benefits for society. So at the moment, bioeconomy is valued at between 4 and 5 trillion dollars in Europe. In the recent strategy that they launched, they set it at I think 7 trillion. So it could probably be better for, or maybe in euros is better. But it is considered that maybe by 2050 we can reach even 30 trillion dollars. So that is a very important amount. But we have to consider there are many issues that are related to this, because as Francis said, it is a multi-sector. So we have to be checking that, and we cannot continue to double count each one of the sectors to say this is the whole bioeconomy. Because traditional agriculture, traditional forestry, fisheries, they are already there. So yes, they contribute, but we want to see it really moving above the traditional sectors. So we identify also many financial mechanisms as sources that were related to climate technologies. So you can see several of them, but the one that was repeated several times in a meeting this last week with the European Commission is the blended finance. That is the one that has been kind of favoring more for the bioeconomy. So it's nothing else but really how you can bring all the different financial instruments that can really support all these different technologies that you can see here, the biomass conversion, all that. So there are many different types of examples of investments, and please go and review this report. But I want to focus on this last one, on the blended finance from Natura. Natura is a company that is based in Brazil, and it is actually very interesting, all the different aspects they consider, from fair trade to ecological packaging, natural origin formulas, climate commitment, and it is 100% vegan. And also they respect that they don't test in animals. So this is very attractive for the consumer. So this is an important aspect in bioeconomy. You have to be thinking also about the consumer. And they receive a very significant amount. So it's over $1 billion reals. So it is many millions of dollars to really move forward their company. And this has been the example that was used at the COP. So whoever was there at the COP probably saw a lot of the stands that was from there. And also this moves us, I'm really moving now to almost to the end, to many ways of they want to monitor the bioeconomy. So because bioeconomy now move into fashion way, a buzzword. Now there are many organizations that also want to monitor it. So this is one of the latest one about financing nature. But we still have many financing challenges. We have to think that there are many high initial costs and risks. There is sometimes lack of commercial viability, regulatory and policy uncertainty, limited public funding in the Global South particularly, and challenges in market integration. So just to finalize, we have to think on some of these key messages. For example, there are now new innovative models emerging. So there are for sustainable agriculture, ecosystem service payments, but bio-based materials are still attracting some equity investment. There are some government and leadership matters. So if there is not really a way to support, but there is a policy that does not support micro, small, medium enterprises, it would be really difficult for them to really increase and scale up. We have to think about this context-specific support because, as I mentioned before, cannot be the same in all around the world, and that there are many emerging instruments, from green bonds to sustainability-linked bonds, and also now even biodiversity schemes, and even crowdfunding. But crowdfunding is still for very, very small enterprises. So I think that we still need this strategic vision where we can link all the different policy or sectors. Think about the just transitions and climate change. Think about not working in silos, because even up until now, we are still working in silos. What does it means in terms of research and climate change, and these international meetings, and also issues about gender, even in the bioeconomy. So I think if we manage to integrate many of them, at least not working in silos, then I think we can really talk about some sustainable bioeconomy. So with that, I want to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we move on to the questions from participants, I leave directly the microphone to you, Damon. Perhaps I think the best way is to ask all of the questions that you have in one go to Francis and Rocio, and then we can move on to the broader discussion.
Sure. Thank you very much. Very insightful, rich presentations. I think we all probably learned a lot from that. Just want to kind of have some questions and kind of, the kind of large open questions, maybe can't answer them completely specifically, and maybe also drawing maybe specific on your insights from, science, kind of engineering backgrounds and so on. Just kind of bringing in the themes of the Institute. We talk a lot about creating public value, kind of directionality of finance, kind of the role of the state in delivering a lot of these solutions to a lot of these challenges, kind of mission-oriented approach. So I'm wondering, here you kind of talk about, you mentioned some financing instruments like blended finance, but how would you foresee perhaps the role of the state in providing financing and kind of creating public value within the bioeconomy and sort of ensuring that there's a systemic transition? Because a theme that pops up a lot in your presentations is that this is a systemic change, moving from kind of fossil economy to a bioeconomy, and this seems like a kind of natural fit for this kind of mission-oriented approach and the role of the state. Because the question is, if this was such a kind of profitable, so dynamic opportunity, why hasn't there been private finance been crowded in to a sufficient extent already? And sort of how do we kind of raise sufficient financing for that? So kind of just a general question about maybe the role of the state, keeping in mind these themes. And I think also it's interesting, I think, Francis, in your presentation, you talk about an interesting slide about kind of creating value in the kind of mid-tech space. A lot of economies maybe can't necessarily push into the high tech space at first. They don't want to focus on these kind of more legacy low-tech technologies and options because they're not sufficiently dynamic enough. So how can, what policies essentially can we do to create these opportunities? And also, what opportunities do you see for kind of maybe developing economies in particular, kind of in the global south? Maybe also Rocio, you could also step on this. How can they sort of create opportunities not to sort of break into these industries, bioeconomy industries, and also upgrade up the value chain and kind of make sure that they're also achieving development goals as well? So maybe reflecting on kind of the developmental benefits of some of these bioeconomy sectors as well, and thinking, are they sufficiently, labor intensive enough to deliver structural transformation? Are they sufficiently kind of spillover intensive? Do they create kind of technological upgrading and so on? And to make sure they're not kind of siloed in extractive industries, because I think that's one of the challenges when you're talking about kind of a lot of these sectors are they're so kind of land use intensive, they're so kind of commodity extraction intensive. How do we ensure that they don't just go into kind of extraction? And I think that the case of Brazil that you mentioned is quite interesting as well, because Brazil has tremendous potential, right? And the kind of the government has developed this bioeconomy strategy recently, and kind of they're really positioning this as kind of next wave of development for the Amazon and kind of maybe quote unquote less developed regions in the Amazon. But how do you make sure that this doesn't just devolve into kind of extraction and sort of these same dynamics that we've seen in the past? How do we kind of chart a new path forward? And of course, a very big question, but kind of just wondering any kind of insights and thoughts on that. And then just a question about kind of innovation and sort of thinking about, from a kind of more science and engineering background, what kind of maybe key technologies would you see are kind of important and for the bioeconomy and developing the bioeconomy? And I'm thinking if we are developing kind of, if we are to develop a mission-oriented approach, sort of what key technologies and sectors should we focus on? And is it worth even kind of setting like specific targets in terms of technologies and sectors and so on? Or is it kind of, again, this kind of systemic transformation as a whole?
Thank you, Damon. Perhaps, Francis, you can go first.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of interesting questions. I'll take just some segments of it, and I'm sure Rocio has a lot to say about it. But I think one thing that comes to mind for me is this role of public procurement, and you could call it. I mean, there has been various experimentation with ecological public procurement, but if you had let's call it a bioeconomy style of public procurement, it would be a little bit different in the sense that basically where there's a possibility to move to a bio-based option and where it involves some type of innovation, not necessarily technical innovation, it can be organizing things differently, and where it's adding value. And that's why I come back to these sort of core principles of adding value, cross-cutting, and innovation. And so the adding value can be, for more substantive, can be more substantive on the social side. It doesn't have to be economic value added. Or it can be a higher level of ecological services provided or reduced, pollution. So bringing it together as a package, you might call it sort of bioeconomy-based public procurement. Wherever there's a public space and public buildings and in general, also in transport, and there's so many areas where you could actually do this. Some of this has been done, and I used to do, before I worked on these issues, I used to work on energy efficiency, and their procurement was actually very targeted and particular, working on the demand side. So I think there the role of the state is quite useful, and related to this issue, where you say why is it difficult to attract financing for some of these bio-based transitions, and I guess it comes back to this idea that economics always likes to tell us that prices are good at coordinating supply and demand, but I think in these type of sectors, I don't think prices are doing a particularly good job of coordinating supply and demand because the applications are heterogeneous. So in tech-based sectors, where you can scale up and thinking about particularly on the energy side, you had nuclear and fossil and so forth, and it was all about reaching economies of scale. And once you do that, it's all set. And even for a lot of other renewables, it's like that with solar and wind and so forth. But for bio-based, it's very heterogeneous. And so the idea that prices and costs are coordinating supply and demand is not really possible. There's just too many, almost an infinite amount of applications. If you accept the principle that it doesn't always have to be economic value added, right? That it can be social and environmental. So that's more, that's a sort of philosophical acceptance in a way that, just to accept the fact that GDP was never supposed to be the measure of everything, right? That there's other paths to prosperity. So it's not a purely economic argument. And then, and then creating value in this mid-tech space. I think Rocio showed an interesting example of that with the Croton. You might want to elaborate on it, but I think there is this tendency to try to jump to the high-tech solution, and you see the funders, they consider themselves funders of innovation, and in certain sectors, it might work well, but they will tend to jump to the higher tech solutions, which there just isn't the appropriate infrastructure for that, and the contribution to the human development side is much smaller or almost non-existent. And Rocio pointed out this example of the Human Development Index, going up for certain bio-based transitions like in Brazil. So let me leave it there for now. And
yeah. So, thank you. Yeah, a lot of questions. So I would say, what is the role of the state? Yeah, I do agree with Francis, and it was mentioned in this meeting in Copenhagen last week that a lot of industry was present, like public procurement, green procurement would be a way from the government to really support especially SMEs or even micro ones. I think that there is some additional role, for example, in research and development. So the grants, the loans are also important. Here in the UK, you have UK Innovate, you have UKRI. So especially with UK Innovate, they can support the small companies. So that is one way to do it. But there are also other ways. I think that there could be even more campaigns from the government about really SDGs. The general public, I don't really think that they are really related to SDGs. And I really think that one that very few people touch on about is sustainable consumption and production. So I really think if we really focus a little bit more into that single SDG, we could make a very big change in terms of what the benefits could be from the bioeconomy. Also, not very fond on the idea that we have to extract everything. I mean, really exploit. But I mean, we cannot deny it. I mean, we need the traditional sectors, but if we could improve them with, for example, in this type of green procurement with biopesticides, biofertilizers, rather than using others. I think that is a way that also the government could help a little bit more. In terms of the innovation, I also think that there are many tiny things that can be done to add value in these supply chains. And they are also not using very big technologies, but the change is really significant. And one example could be also in Lake Victoria, for example, in between Kenya and Uganda. There are actually several companies that are already working with hyacinth, that it is an environmental problem for the lake, and now they are using it to produce some bioplastics. And this is nothing new. Even I am originally from Mexico. Even in Lake Chapala, is the biggest lake we had the same problem, and they started to produce flour from this to feed animals. So there is always a way, and also not necessarily really high technologies, but we will need some high technologies for certain aspects, and that is where biotechnology enters. So I think also that, again, the companies were complaining once more about where is the money to scale up, where is the money, the investment to really move. So in Europe, there is now the European Biobase, I think it's called, bank, and this is a finance institution that all they are doing is funding projects related to bioeconomy. So I really think that we need this kind of separate financing mechanisms that are really targeted for what it is really considered the bioeconomy, and to help other countries to really add this value into their supply chains. Maybe just one last example. For instance, Kenya produces most of the vegetables, flowers, and fruits that we consume in the UK. Sainsbury has their greenhouses over there, and there is no added value at all, not even for the packaging. So if the government could incentivize them to really make this change, I think that the locals could also benefit from that, but with proper jobs. Because, one last example. For instance, there also in Kenya, they are doing this already in Brazil. Like the sugarcane bagasse is used not only for their boilers, for their own internal processes, but it is used to make, for example, pellets and to sell them to other sectors. They were doing this. In Kenya, they were happy to say, we are hiring 50 women. Yeah, but the work they were doing was drying the sugarcane bagasse with their feet or with their hands. I mean, that is not really a proper job. Even if for them they receive $1 additional per day, it is not really a proper job. So why not trying to really think about how to create a proper job with transfer of skills, that it is really not just a task. And the thing of course, there are still many differences in terms of gender. That's why I always like to emphasize that area also within the bioeconomy.
Thank you, Rocio. If you have any reflection or comments, Damon, before I open the floor to the public.
Yeah, briefly, thank you very much for the answers. I know, of course, very kind of difficult questions to answer, but I think it was interesting you saying about kind of at the end the directionality of finance, and sort of this like idea of like a biobank within the EU. So I was wondering maybe if you expand more on that, and sort of how can we generate specific directionality into technological innovation, investing in the innovation, but also kind of productive investment as well, and making sure that this investing properly in kind of productive capabilities and so on. Maybe if you have any more examples and kind of reflections on that. Yeah,
I think the idea with this funding mechanism, with these banks, is really that we move a little bit beyond of R&D. Because again, the research councils, even the European Commission, they're funding this type of projects, but we are always at R&D. And I have a colleague at Imperial College that always asks me, when are they going to build the biorefinery? I mean, we have worked on all these projects. When is they are going to? Yeah, but there is no money to build the biorefinery. And maybe the companies that are already there don't have the money to buy the patents that were developed there or to invest on that. So some of the scale up for some of these companies is not so difficult. It is the money that is needed. So I really think that the issue here has to be targeting this financial sector where they can really see the benefit of it. And one last thing is the risking, the concept, even the concept. The risking them, then they don't make the investors feel insecure about financing this type, because whoever is going to finance, they want to see a profit. But if the work is done properly, they will see, yes, there will be a profit. Maybe not in the first 3 or 5 years, because that was the problem we saw with biofuels, that everybody wanted to have the profit in 5 years. But at least if they can think, yes, there will be a profit, not immediately. But I think the problem is also how sometimes those who want their projects to be financed, they don't really finish that part of the work, saying, okay, I researched the market is growing into this, and there will be profits in 5 to 8 years, for example.
Thank you. Perhaps we can start gathering questions here in the room, and then if there's any question online, we'll gather them after. If you have any question, raise your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Anna Hope, and I work as a research fellow here at the Institute. And I focus on supporting the UK with its net zero transition. So I think a lot of what you're saying is really relevant. I was actually going to ask a question about public procurement, and then you both preemptively answered my question. So just to say that that's something we think about a lot in terms of the role of the state in fulfilling a sort of demand function, and the way that that can sort of support these innovation ecosystems. I would also say something we look at is the role of public finance in exactly what you're saying in terms of the scaling up. So not just thinking about innovation funding from like a UKRI, for example, but also what is the role in something like the National Wealth Fund, which is relatively new, and is built for purpose in terms of scaling up new technologies rather than providing like early stage funding. My question is not related to either of those topics, but I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on sort of the policy focus on net zero as being solely centered around like driving down carbon emissions, and whether we kind of need to rethink that as a conceptual framework, and in maybe a more holistic way to incorporate things like the bioeconomy. Because I think something we see in our work is that people think that net zero means switching everything to renewable energy and then you stop there. But I think the work that you're speaking to indicates that there's a lot more nuance to it than that. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? So we'll go with that one first. Francis?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly something to be said for the constraints of having, a sole focus on net zero goals, and how this, I mean, it works for certain types of energy transitions. Maybe it works, and in thinking about emissions, and in some, so it has a sort of technical bias, you might say. Whereas in these sectors that we're talking about here, it's many different transitions playing out at the same time, and also we're dealing with what is often referred to as the polycrisis: it's climate, biodiversity, pollution. The third crisis can also be land degradation, and is also significant. And here, I think, and coming back to maybe connecting a few of these things is that it's not so much just scaling up this or that, but it's matching the opportunities, because because you're dealing with things that work at many different scales. Then it's not often obvious, and it's definitely not obvious to the financiers, because they're not used to dealing with this diverse space. And so, for example, I was in visiting Thailand again a few weeks ago, and the FAO organized this sort of bio-entrepreneurs fair. And so you had about 50 different entrepreneurs who got to talk to policymakers and others and to each other. And then you could see, this connects, I can work on soils and that will help you to market your product and so forth and so on. And that, of course, that's a long process. It's more difficult and it has to be built a little bit from the bottom up. But that's one of the pathways. And so this sort of matchmaking, it sounds kind of basic, but it actually can make a big difference, especially in the middle income countries where these opportunities are there and just not, they haven't managed to meet each other.
If I just may add, I think that we have to be also clear that not all net zero pathways are in the bioeconomy. And also that net zero is not a pathway. Net zero is the goal. So we can have many different pathways. And I think that there has been a lot of misunderstanding there, because if you see one of the International Energy Agency reports, they actually mention this. Net zero is not really the pathway, but many are considering it is the pathway. And it's not like that. And there are many things that you can do that are related to renewable energy, but that is nothing to do with bioeconomy. But there are other things that are there. There are still a lot of misunderstandings. Like if you see in the news recently about the aspect of forestry, again, you cannot compare tropical forests with temperate forests. And you saw it was recently in the news. Some of the forests in temperate areas, they are not sinking any more CO2, because that's the way the ecosystem of these areas work. So the best thing to do would be to really manage the forest. But if you say that, the foresters will kill you, because they don't want anybody to cut any tree. But I mean, I don't know, that could be one way. And also if you start to think about, now they are starting to focus too much on CCS, for instance. On CCS, it's the way. We are going to extract all the CO2 from the atmosphere and put it underground, and it is a lot. And it's so costly. I mean, why they want to invest on that and not 1 million, for example, in a company in bioeconomy? Or as they were saying, I don't know if you saw also in the news, it was actually today, the UN asking for all the countries around the world to provide some funds to the UN, and comparing on how much it has been invested in war. In guns, in armament. So it is very difficult. And if you really see how much the wars emit, I mean, then why are we talking about net zero?
Go ahead, Luca.
Thanks. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Rocio. My name is Luca. I worked at the Institute for several years, and I recently started a new organization focusing on restoring post-mining landscapes. I'd like to pause on the concept of extraction. Damon, it's a concept that you also pulled out of the story. I felt that a really compelling graph that both of you showed was the opportunity around shifting from a fossil-based economy to a bioeconomy. But I guess implicit is in that is an assumption that, first thing you say is that I guess we can all agree that the fossil-based economy is very much based on extractivist methods and extraction. And that's not only in terms of the resources that you use, but also in terms of the system that we've built around it. Francis, you mentioned in the innovation space that patents, a lot of the work that we do in the innovation space is also looking at patents as being too wide, too strong, too upstream. Which means that a lot of the value is captured by certain folks in the value chain and not necessarily by others. Rocio, you also gave the example of workers in Kenya not being able to move up the value chain or being upskilled in a certain way. So I'd like to just pause on the concept of extraction, see if there's any other thoughts that you'd like to share on that side of how we can really ensure that we're not replicating the same kind of extractivist methods in the new bioeconomy that we've been employing in the fossil fuel economy.
Rocio, you want to go first?
Look, I didn't present it today, but a month and a half ago, we launched another report in the Society of Ecological Restoration. They have this every 2 years, this conference. So we launched this report there about landscape restoration. And it is, again, not a new concept. It has been there since, I think, the 70s. But let's say my contribution within that is that I link it to this landscape governance, because I think there is a way to do it if we put it also the emphasis on landscape restoration and the bioeconomy. Because there is a lot of land, and you mentioned it as well. I mean, land that we are losing it through different processes. There is a natural desertification. There's nothing we can do about that, but there are others that are human-induced, and we could actually do that. From my point of view, the big difference on trying to reduce that is really, again, it's the context. It cannot be treated globally. And that is a little bit what I am against of all these international organizations trying to drive it as the world bioeconomy, the global bioeconomy. It is very contextual. So from my point of view, we have to respect it like that. We forget about the precautionary principle very, very often. It is also nothing new, but it is just that. And I think that the social aspects could make really the big difference here. So if it is a little bit more community driven, it could really have more benefits, because then you will reduce also this extractivism rather than thinking, let's have hectares of palm oil. Okay, it has already passed, but now let's try to do the best of and try to avoid that. So I don't know, all these concepts about moving the frontier to the Amazon, for me, it's a little bit scary, because if it is done properly, well, maybe we will have all the benefits. If it is not, then we will be really promoting a lot of deforestation and a lot of loss of species over there, and it is a very rich area. So I think that if we can move to the concept of producing more with less, I think most of these products from the Amazon, you can't really produce a lot for less. So you don't need a lot of hectares, but it is, you will have to have the communities collecting. But if they are going to be paid as just because they collected it, then there is not really more benefit for them. So at least for me, I would like to see really that there is more emphasis on the social side and a more emphasis on doing more with less.
Yeah, and there is this sort of inherent bias in our economic systems towards extraction and production, right? And you can imagine a system whereby extraction is always taxed, and those are used, for regeneration. That then, and of course, everyone seems to hate taxes, especially nowadays. So it's not easy to do all these principles that look beautiful in economic textbooks, but never quite work out. So how can you accomplish something a little bit similar, otherwise, is the question. And one way to do it is to have the, not just bioeconomy, but circular bioeconomy, that somehow all principles have to, as Rocio said, to do more with less, and to ensure that, the system is somehow applying regenerative principles. Now, it's easier said than done, and takes, of course, a long time. And somehow, I think in the end, there has to be this principle of, sufficiency. Enough is enough. Saturation, right? Can we really just consume more and more and more? it's not adding to anyone's happiness. So so I think the demand side has to be addressed as well, and not just the supply side. So yeah, so to incorporate those principles, and I wanted to tie into that your question, Damon, earlier about targets and technologies, because I think that there can be this tendency to think, there's always this tendency to think, well, don't we have to pick a winner? But I think you can be fairly technology neutral in these cases, and in a way that constrains extraction, let's say. And so applying, some of these sort of basic principles. And I also agree with Rocio that we are seeing this problem of trying to apply global standards for everything, and that it doesn't work very well with bioeconomy. With technologies like nuclear or something like this, it's different. It's not the same. Here, the diversity and the local physical resources are so different. You cannot have it. You might be able to have some regional standards that could be more useful, so that at least neighboring countries, can agree on. And this is, of course, done already in the EU, and to some extent in East Africa as well. So this can be a good strategy, is the regional approach, and that could help with extraction also, because then if they cooperate, they can say, well, yeah, we can actually by trade, instead of each one engaging in all these extractive resources, we can say, well, through comparative advantages, we can actually do this and this, and we'll all be better off.
Thank you. Before we wrap up the event, just checking if there's any questions online. Yes. Perhaps give the microphone directly to Ben.
Let me just pull these up. Yeah, we got two questions online. One from JT Stocks, who asks, do we need to get away from GDP as a measure of ultimate prosperity for the transition into the bioeconomy? Do you see any significant movement towards alternative measures of human prosperity that stand out? And we have another question for Dr. Johnson. Could you expand a little bit more on the concept of multi-level governance in the bioeconomy remit? How could a multi-level type of governance could help grow the sector and its finance needs?
Perhaps you can take the one, Francis, on multi-level governance, and Rocio the one on GDP.
You want to go first with GDP? Yeah, the idea of the multi-level governance is because certain aspects of bioeconomy are extremely local, but they have to have some coordination at national level. And then you also have this interesting regional component, because the resources of one country, even if they're right next to each other, the bioresources can be very different. So usually what we mean by that, and I mean the EU is already doing this, because you have legislation in the EU and then it's transposed into national legislation, and there's a reasonable amount of coordination in this strategy. And then bringing that to the local level, so sort of going across these three levels, implies something that's really challenging, and that's this idea of stakeholder consultation. And this is really challenging, because even in the EU, where there's so many consultations, there will still be these complaints, oh, we weren't consulted, And so at some point, I think the idea of citizen science comes into this as well, and that the bioeconomy can really be successful, the more people are engaged in it. So it comes back to basic education, and that, studying biology and science in school and so forth, so that people are able to contribute to this, and that it's not just a technology that we grab like an iPhone or plugging into electricity, that it's part of your experience. I mean, that's a very idealistic vision, but it would actually empower bioeconomy in a way that's harder to do from the top down. But on the other hand, the top down is of course very helpful, like the biobank. A good strategy that provides targets and And financing of courses is also extremely helpful. So this is what we mean by the multi-level.
The report I mentioned that we launched on landscape restoration actually was on policy coherence. And that is exactly what it does, looking at that. And I think that that would be also the way to move it to this monitoring question. And I think that the monitoring that we have, it tends to be more aspirational, how we would like it to be rather than the actual facts. On GDP, well, I'm not really an economist, so I could say maybe it's not the best one, but it's the one we have. But it is not the only one we have. So that's what I want to link. I like to link it also with Human Development Index and with Gini. Because at least with those, when we combine them, they give you a better idea of what is happening. Problem is that Human Development Index is, in many countries, you only have it at a national level. So you cannot really go down. And like in the case of Brazil, at least it gives us some better idea. But in other areas, you don't have that. But I think that we have to make if we manage to make a good use of the different indexes and indicators that are already there. At least we know that the databases are there, because that is the problem we also have in terms of research when there is no data. So at least with those we can live a little bit with them. And as I said before, maybe just combining at least these three: Human Development Index, Gini, that is on inequality for those who do not know, but majority of you are from the social science, and GDP.
Thank you, Rocio. Just to wrap up the conversation, at IPP we talk a lot about cross-sectoral activities, innovation, the role of the state, public policy, and I think we don't talk enough about the bioeconomy. And the bioeconomy itself, for how it's built, it is a cross-sectoral approach. It is an approach that needs innovation in order to add value, as Francis said, not just economic value, but also social, environmental value or public value, using our language. So I hope that this is kind of the start of some longer term conversations related to the bioeconomy, and that this enters the agenda of our institute more prominently. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you to everybody here and also to the people online. Thank you to Damon, Rocio, and Francis.
Thank you.
And thanks for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.